A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, who've accepted our invitation to this public forum and turned up here at very short notice. May I first welcome our editor, Mr. Siddharth Vararajan, to the stage. Friends, you know that the gang rape in Delhi has caught the nation's attention. It has remained on page one and the lead stories in all television channels for the last 10 days. And it was only late last night that the 23-year-old medical student was flown in an air ambulance to Singapore for further treatment. We pray that she gets well and returns back to India to fight her battle, which has now become a national battle. We in the Hindu thought that this was the right time to debate this subject impassionately and provide a platform for not just our panel of speakers, but also the public at large to participate in such an important debate. At very short notice, we have put together a galaxy of speakers who were kind enough to accept our invitation. We are very glad that they are here with us this evening and will be sharing their thoughts with you. I need not emphasize the importance or the depth of this issue, which is not new to India or to any part of this world. But it has acquired such a national significance now in the wake of the Delhi rape. It has so happened that over the last 3 days or 4 days, we've had so many more reports of rape coming in from all parts of the country, including a couple from Tamil Nadu itself. With us today is Justice Prabha Sridevan, a retired judge of the Madras High Court and now a member of the chairperson of the Intellectual Property Appellate Board. It'll be foolish on my part to try and introduce Prabha Sridevan to this audience anywhere in the city. I will quote from her own speeches or judgments to show the kind of metal that she is made of. Of a judge, she says, "I think you can make a social change by your own judgments on the basis of what philosophy is. You can make a change in a way no other position can." And that is what she did for the years that she was in the Madras High Court. Addressing an international conference on feminism and law, she said, and I quote, "Because courts are accountable to the people of India, in whose name the Constitution speaks, they must make maximum endeavor to render justice. It is not enough that their decisions are according to law. They must be just." Underline that word. And commenting on the two-finger test for rape survivors, she said, "It violates the woman's right to equality, her right to dignity, and her absolute right over her body, and the fact that only now there is a move to ban. It shows how we have looked at the woman. We must see this right clearly as an unassailable right, but we see it through a glass darkly, and the legal system is part of us." Truly said, she noted, "Men do not lose control and get violent. They control through violence." That was the essence of Prabha Sridevan, and we are glad she is with us today. May I invite her to the stage. We are glad to have with us Mr. R. Nataraj, former Director General of Police, Tamil Nadu, and now a chairperson of the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission. I must mention how, at very short notice, much shorter than the other speakers, he readily agreed to be with us this evening. We are extremely thankful to you, sir, for having accepted our invitation this short notice. We have a very good novel and a film later called An Officer and a Gentleman. That should aptly describe what Mr. Nataraj is. He earned a name for himself in the police force and was what the policemen claimed to be friends of the people. That was the concept that he introduced when he was Commissioner of Police, Chennai, for 3 years, which made a huge difference to the city we live in. We are very glad that he is here, and he has taken on a massive task of setting the house in order in the Public Service Commission. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Can I request Lata Ganapati to kindly give him a bouquet? Another distinguished speaker on our panel today is a journalist, a TV anchor, a filmmaker, and an academician, Mr. Shashi Kumar. He started his career with Doordarshan in the days when television was introduced, and I dare say that the elder generation would still remember him as one who anchored the best English newses that we have seen in the early days of television. We are proud to say that he was also our West Asia correspondent of the Hindu when we first set up a bureau there. He was also with PTI TV as its chief producer and went on to launch Asianet, one of India's first regional satellite television channels. Today, he is part of the Media Development Foundation, is the chairman of the trust which runs that foundation, which also runs the Asian College of Journalism, from where most of Hindu's new recruits for the last 5-6 years have come from. We are glad to have Mr. Shashi Kumar with us. He is part of us, and we welcome him to the stage. May I request Mr. K. Venkatramana, Chief of Bureau, Tamil Nadu, the Hindu, to kindly present him a moment. We are glad to have with us Ms. Nagasila, a distinguished and leading lawyer, an LLM Masters in Law from Pune University. She has been practicing in the Madras High Court for the last 25 years. She specializes in labor and service matters and has appeared for several cases pertaining to sexual harassment at workplace. She has assisted victims in the Premananda rape case. She advises several women's groups and organizations on issues relating to violence, has lectured police academies and institutions on sexual violence. She has co-authored a textbook on criminal law and the Halsbury's Laws of India, criminal law volumes. She co-authored over 300 articles for the Legal File, a fortnightly column we published in the Hindu. She has been associated with the People's Union for Civil Liberties and appeared for the PUCL before the Supreme Court, as also in the Madras High Court, on several human rights issues, environmental issues, and cases of public interest. We request Ms. Nagasila to the stage. May I request Mr. Sridhar, Assistant Regional General Manager of the Hindu, to kindly give her a bouquet and a memento. We are looking at two young faces, fresh faces, still in college. One is Pushkal Sivam, a student and an aspiring journalist, a second-year student of Humanities and Social Sciences at the IIT Madras. In his 3-year-long stint as a student journalist, Pushkal has questioned the Dalai Lama, interviewed survivors in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist bomb attack, lived for a week on a handful of rupees, as if to find out if the Planning Commission's formula for poverty can be really lived. He gained access to women's prison to discover innocent children locked in the prisons for years. Youth Journalism International, a Connecticut-based NGO, named Pushkal as a Student Journalist of the Year 2012 in a contest open to student journalists worldwide. Pushkal is also a tandem reporter in India for the DAAD, a German academic exchange service, the largest German support organization in the field of international academic operation. He has written for print and online medium, including an internship with the Hindu. Pushkal Shivam, onto the stage, please. May I request Zara Khan to kindly come over and give him a bouquet? And now we have one from the host. Supriya Rao is currently pursuing her first year business administration at Ethiraj College. She is also doing her first year of psychology at the University of Madras. When she is not reading novels, she can be found singing or at least listening to music. Supriya loves writing and is currently working on a novel. She calls it a psychological thriller. She is hoping to get published very soon. She is obsessed with automobiles and is forever trying to find out new facts about them. Welcome Supriya to the stage. I request Meera Srinivasan to kindly give her a bouquet and a memento. Friends, I now hand over the proceedings to our editor. Siddharth will outline the program and the way that we will go about it, followed by the question and answer session. Siddharth.
I would like to repeat the thanks that he expressed to all of you, the audience, for coming here at an event that we have organized at fairly short notice, and also to all our speakers. I don't need to underline the urgency or the immediacy of the issue that we will be discussing today. Even as we meet here, our thoughts are with the survivor, with the fighting woman who is battling against very difficult odds, right now undergoing treatment in Singapore. The attack on her has proved to be something of a catalyst, the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the public awareness, public tolerance, public attitudes towards the growing incidence of rape, sexual assault, sexual violence against women, girls, children in our country. And at The Hindu, we felt this was a very, very important moment, looking at the kind of anger, the outpouring of outrage, the mobilization that has happened in Delhi and other cities, for us to try to reflect a little on the wider issues that this horrific attack have raised for us. And if we as a collective, as a society, do not use this occasion to introspect, to debate, to deliberate in a reasoned manner about why we are afflicted with this kind of a problem and what the possible solution to this could be, if we are unable to do it at this moment, then we will be condemned to suffer more such attacks in the weeks and months and years ahead. So this is a moment that all of us owe it to the victim of this attack, to all victims of sexual assault and rape in India. We owe it to them to actually discuss, debate, deliberate, and identify a way forward. Never has there been a more propitious time when, as a nation, as a people, the public has been so united and so determined to find a way to put an end to the problem of rape and sexual violence and sexual assault. Now, we have framed today's public forum in a very broad manner because the attack itself and some of the subsequent events, the protests in Delhi, the manner in which the protests have been handled, the attitudes at the official level that have been brought to the fore. Most recently, I don't know how many of you switched on the television today, but the statement by the newly elected member of parliament from Jangipur, Abhijit Mukherjee, the son of the President of India, who insulted his electorate, insulted the people of West Bengal, insulted all women of India, all right-thinking women and men of India, by denigrating the protesters in Delhi as women who are highly painted and dented. God only knows what he meant by that. The mind boggles as to how an MP, somebody who swears by the Constitution and the principles that the Constitution embodies, can make these kinds of callous, insensitive remarks and be blind to the public longing for change. And if forums like ours and other gatherings and meetings that are being held and will be held by other organizations across the country are to have any effect, then we must create a climate where no politician, no official, no officer can even think about making these kinds of callous, insensitive remarks which merely show how completely unaware and out of their depths these people are. In a way, it has highlighted, to my mind at least, the problem of attitudes, which is something that we wanted to focus on in today's public forum. But apart from the wider issues of, or the specific issues of crime and punishment, the problem of rape and sexual violence is first and foremost, in my opinion, also a question of attitude, a problem of attitude. The attitude of men of misplaced masculinity, fueled by a false sense of entitlement, which when many men think that they have the right to do what they want with a woman, with a woman's body. This attitude cultivated by a patriarchal system is something that I think we need to challenge, something we need to question. We need to find ways for us to overcome this as a society. Then there's the attitude of those who rule us. I mentioned Abhijit Mukherjee, who's one MP, but you heard the statement of the head of the Congress party in Andhra Pradesh, who said the country may have one freedom at midnight, but that doesn't mean that women and young girls have the freedom to roam around. This kind of an attitude that we see often expressed by those in authority is an attitude of blaming the victim. How can it even occur to any civilized person at a time when a woman is battling for her life because of an assault perpetrated on her to even talk about why a woman should be at some place at some point of day? It's entirely her business. But this attempt to regulate, this kind of backward attitude, the attempt to regulate women, regulate women's movement, to use sexual violence and sexual assault to dictate to women how they must dress, how they must behave, how they must talk, where they can go, where they can't go, is something that we must again fight. Because this attitude also helps to fuel the kind of mindset which produces sexual violence in all societies. And lastly, the attitude that's at some level in all of us as a society. The attitude that was reflected in some members of parliament talking about how the rape victim is suffering, that she's as good as dead, that she is a zinda lash, implying that there is no possibility of hope, no possibility of justice, no possibility of leading a normal life. And this attitude also fuels the kind of demands that we've seen in recent weeks for the superficial demand for instant justice, which is very easy for all of us to make and to sound very radical and to sound very caring and concerning and concerned. But how many of us are willing to question the way in which the role that upbringing, family values, culture, the role that all of these factors play in creating the conditions for a crime as heinous as rape? So, when we were discussing this editorially, we hit upon the idea of having a public forum, that this is a time when some of these issues should be opened up for debate in a cool, collected, rational manner, where we avoid knee-jerk responses, but try to focus on different aspects of this problem. And the panel that we have assembled today, as Jayanth explained, comes from a variety of backgrounds. They have their own, each speaker has his or her own perspective and will focus on different aspects of the problem. And I'm very happy that we have two young speakers, because in many ways the initiative taken by the young people of Delhi, their refusal to put up with this, their decision to say enough is enough in the face of police pressure, in the face of social pressure, in the face of all kinds of pressures and attitudes, I think is something which gives us a lot of hope that as a society, as a nation, we can find a way to deal with this sort of problem. So I would request each of our speakers to take 10 minutes to present their particular point of view, their perspective. It would help if each of them are, each of you sticks to the time frame, because that will allow us to have more time for discussion, questions and comments from the floor. When we do open the floor for comments or discussions, my request to everybody would be to be as brief as possible. Introduce yourself in a line, and then direct your question to whoever you want to answer it, or present a very, very short, succinct point of view. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite
I would request Mr. Siddharth to kindly give a bouquet and a memento to our sponsor, Shriram Chits. Mr. Ramesh, General Manager Shriram Chits, will be here to see the bouquet. Just one mail and one phone call was all that it needed to get them to sponsor this event. Thank you, sir. For your
Once again, sir, thank you for your support and generosity in helping us to organize this event. The first speaker then will be Ms. Prabha Sridevan. Ma'am, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Good evening to all of you. I thank the Hindu for bringing us all together now. But in the last few days, one has felt really tired. And how long will one fight the battle for equality? And I would like to slightly modify the theme as crime and protection, crime and prevention rather than crime and punishment, and instead of rape, sexual assault of any kind. There have been questions, why this huge uproar only now? There have been many girls, many women, many children who have suffered this violence, some marginalized, some rural women, tribals, Dalits, but why only now? But we really don't know why history chooses a particular moment. Perhaps this girl from Delhi is going to be our own Rosa Parks, to prove that women are different but equal, equal all the way. At the same time, I've been reading news reports in the last 2 weeks of very disturbing judgments coming from abroad. One was a judgment of the Supreme Court of California, where I normally don't use the word male judge or female judge, but this time this judge was a man, and he says, rape doesn't happen without the woman's consent. Does he have a clue? Then there was just other male judge from another state of USA, and he says, it is legal to fire a woman employee if she is irresistibly attractive. Who decides that? Then comes this notification in Swaziland that women cannot wear mini skirts And the reason is, anyway, the men are disrobing you in their mind's eye and being provoked, so why help them by wearing mini skirts? So shall women, all of us, fade away screaming silently into the night? I really don't know. In contrast to this, there have been two judgments, both of women judges. One was a judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada, Justice Claire Leroux-Dubé. And it was a case where this girl went seeking employment and the man said, "Come into the trailer." She hesitated. And the question was whether there can be implied consent to sexual advance. The trial court said there could be implied consent. And the Supreme Court of Canada said there is no such thing as implied consent where this is concerned. A no means no, nothing else. It doesn't mean actually I mean yes, though I am saying no. The other judgment was from Madam Navi Pillai, who now heads the UN Human Rights Commission, while she was on the War Tribunal, and she said that rape is a war crime. Rape is actually rape and any sexual assault are expression of power. The aggressor wants the person to know that he can exert power over her. And it is a statement to show that she is unequal. It is a statement that dehumanizes her, takes away the humanness from her. And this cannot be solved, I feel, by increasing the punishment, making it more severe. The process of commencing from complaint, treatment, trial should be swift and sensitive. The woman in Kadalur has gone to three different hospitals seeking help. That cannot be. Every hospital, every police station is accountable and should take responsibility for accepting the promise of equality that we gave to ourselves when we became independent. Justice Albie Sachs says that when marginalization sometimes happens, but when the state plays a part in marginalization, the victims have nowhere to go. And that happens when hospitals or at police stations, the woman who has suffered the sexual assault is treated without acknowledgement of her dignity. And for this, our mental attitudes to change right from the time we were in the womb, because it starts there. And I will tell you the responses of 2 judicial officers. From 2002 to 2007, I was part of a team which educated on equality. And I went to different high courts. This was one of the high courts somewhere in India. And at the beginning, one of the judges, they are all magistrates and new entrant judges. One of the magistrates said, "You are asking us to overturn a 5,000-year-old tradition." The 5,000-year-old tradition did not tell us that women should be stripped of her dignity. Anyway, that's what he said. After the 5-day exercise, he said, "Now I understand." This was a positive response. As against that, there was another judicial officer who just did not understand. And he said, "Madam, when you want to put the pen inside the holder and the holder wants to escape, You drag the holder and put the pen in. You feel disgust, right? You feel horrible. Then just imagine what the woman or the child or the boy, any human being whose physical integrity is violated. These are the attitudes that we have to battle. To that officer who's serving somewhere in India, the woman was nothing more than a pen holder. She was just that. And all of us sometimes, I feel, play a part, perhaps of complicity, perhaps of silence, in this objectification of women. And I think I just have 1 minute more. 3. I have 2 or 3 examples of objectification of women, and I will share that with you. And at the end of the discussion, maybe we can think of how else, in how many other occasions this objectification happens. One are what are called the item dances in films, where the woman is just the object to be lusted after. The other, ostentatious weddings, that too objectifies the woman. Then there are advertisements which underscore the position that woman is only an object. And this must change. And I really don't know how we start the change. Perhaps each one teach one, each one change the other. But most of all, when you see something happening in front of you to anybody else, I think you should say stop. I think we should pick up that courage. We should not be silent in the face of injustice. Changing the system, changing the police station, changing the hospitals, changing the judiciary will follow. We should first change our attitude to the woman. I think the woman has suffered enough. I think enough, no more. There is a quotation from Bharatiyar's Panjali Sabadam, and it is slightly violent, but I think it kind of expresses the collective anger that we have seen when Bhima sees the woman's dignity being assaulted. He tells his younger brother, Erithalal konduva, take the fire and light the hand which played dice and sold the woman away. Probably it's this rage that is now manifesting itself, but we should not be consumed and the rage eat upon itself and quieten down. I think we should fight this battle for equality. I think women have suffered enough, and I really thank Hindu for allowing me this space to express my deep anguish and sometimes a sense of shame too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that moving address. You focused not just on the situation in India, but you brought in references to backward judicial attitudes from around the world, problem of objectification of women, and the need for change to begin, not necessarily or most immediately in official institutions or attitudes, but also in the daily lives of all of us. Our next speaker is former DGP, Mr. Nataraj, please.
Madam quoted Bharatiyar, the same Panjali Sabadam, he also says, நெட்டை மரங்களாக நின்று புலவினர் பெட்டை புலம்பல் பிறருக்கு துடையாமோ. That is what we are hearing, that everybody is talking. It should not become a பெட்டை புலம்பல் பிறருக்கு துடையாமோ. It should be helpful, it should be constructive. So I am very happy and I am very grateful to Hindu for having given me an opportunity. I will quickly collect my thoughts. Of course, only a very brief time was given to me, and present before you. The Delhi police are doing a very difficult job, because nobody would like to be in the shoes of Neeraj Kumar, the Commissioner of Police there. Now, what Justice Prabhas Sridevan said is very, very true, very apt, and what the fault is within us. And that is what the Hindu editorial page article today, Praveen Swami, it's a very nice article where he has said, look at yourself in the mirror and you're the problem. Now, I cannot be talking about various other issues. If I talk about it, it's a very, very gray area. The preventive aspect, what is the role of police in preventing such incidents? Whether increased policing, increased patrolling, creating awareness will prevent such crimes. It's all a very, very difficult thing to say. But definitely, I for one feel that police have a very important role in preventing crime. And if a station house officer, if he decides to put down crime with a very heavy hand, it is possible. Because that is, of course, many may not agree. My own officers may not agree. Even an accident case, I used to say, whenever some death takes place, I used to say, our hands are soaked in blood. We are not able to prevent. The very fact that it is an accident, it is preventable. So that is one thing. So now I will talk about this preventive angle to a certain extent, how much the police patrolling and checking of vehicles will help. And later on, with regard to the investigation aspect, and of course the whole gamut of the criminal administration system. Very quickly I will go through it. As I said, if it is a focused patrolling, if it is patrolling targeted to prevent a particular crime, type of crime, it is possible. Like for example, in a weekend, you increase patrolling on roads leading to ECR or some of the five-star hotels and other places, increase the patrolling, and there's no need to check vehicles. In fact, I am against checking of vehicles. Our policemen stopping youngsters and then checking and talking to them, delaying them. I am not at all for it. I said you do checking, your very presence of a policeman in uniform, it deters crime. At least the crime is postponed. We cannot prevent crime. I cannot say 100% I'll be in a position to prevent crime in any place. It is not possible. But because given the fact that for every citizen we have 800 policemen, 800 citizens we have one policeman. So it is not possible to prevent all the crime. At least a criminal who has got a design, that is postponed. That is why we started the system of having the booths, the various places, the outposts. It may be empty. It is not possible to, there is a criticism. All these booths are there, it is empty. I said, doesn't matter. The very fact that there is a red building in a corner and there is a light burning, it is sufficient. At least the fellow will be postponing whatever he wanted to do. That is one thing, that is a preventive angle. It cannot absolutely prevent crime, but at the same time, it will deter, it will serve as a very good deterrence. That is one aspect. Now, coming to the specifics of assault, sexual assault, I am fully in agreement that we should not use the word rape. Even in the case of this particular victim, the media has said medical student, media has said from where they came. They should not say all these things. It should not be published at all. Even in the case of where a sex worker, I said you should not photograph, because in every, particularly in the local dailies, they'll photograph the girl and publish it in a very, very ugly way. So I said, no, there should not be even a mention about all these things, even the news, because we used to say they are not accused, they are rescued. These people who are found, the sex workers who are found in some places, they are rescued and restored to the family. That should be the approach of the policeman. A lot of sensitization is required. In fact, even some time back, there was a sting operation in Delhi where the policeman was asked informally, what he thinks about the women, the girls, the way they dress, things like that. So the policeman, the way they answered, it showed that they're totally insensitive to the problem. That's a problem. This is the issue with this, and even any amount of sensitization is not sufficient. We had this, the day, November 25th, as a day where we have to observe as a day for abolition of crime against women. And December 10th was the World Human Rights Day. And within a month of these two important days, we have this particular incident taking place. And in the investigation stage, if you see the station house officer, cases which come to him, in many cases where a girl elopes with a boy, the parents come and say that they have gone, now you have to put a very stringent section and ensure that this is put an end to, our girl is retrieved. So the station house officer, he registers a case of 376-511, attempt to rape, and also a cheating, 420. This is added, and we go about our investigation. So it is not taken very seriously. So it's a girl eloping with a boy, so the girl is restored to the parents. They put an end to that. The other serious actual incidents of rape which takes place, again, the policemen are very insensitive. The way they question the girl, it is very, very difficult for the girl to face that kind of questions. First, they will ask, as the speakers very rightly said, they'll put the blame on the girl. Why did you go there? What happened? What all he did? In fact, as per law, a mere penetration is rape. So they will ask in detail what all happened, whether the act was completed. So put the girl under tremendous trauma. And it's very difficult. That is why these women police are very, very important at the investigation stage to handle the victim. Similarly, the treatment of victim in the hospital. There should be a single window where she gets treated for her assault as well as other factors. Other factors should be done in one place. There's no question of sending her from one place to another. And invariably, our investigation is delayed because we have to get the chemical analysis report. And that takes a very, very long time. The normal course, I'm talking about a normal course. There was a case in Kerala of a gang rape, similar case, which was investigated by the police, very badly investigated. The victims' people went to the High Court, and High Court ordered investigation by CBI. And after 7 years of continuous focused attention on this case, they were able to get conviction. Imagine, it has taken 7 years. And we file a charge sheet. There is a delay in taking the case on file. Again, it is a sessions case. It has to go from one magistrate's court to a sessions case. And after that, the trial proceeds. If it's a gang rape, if one accused does not turn up, again, there is an adjournment waiting for the accused to come. This is another problem we face. So, but if the station house officer and the supervisory officers, they focus on this case and ensure that it should be quickly investigated and disposed of, it is possible. We did it in heinous crimes, in murder cases. I said, you set a target. Why can't we complete? Because there are fast-track courts. Why can't we ensure that these cases are investigated quickly and pushed? And we did it in murder cases. We got the conviction in 3 months, 2 months, 1 month. Ultimately, in 7 days, we got conviction in a heinous offense. When I was a commissioner of police, it was possible. So in such cases where there is an attention on this within the criminal administration system, it is possible to implement, to ensure that speedy justice reaches the victims' people. In late 90s, there was a reference from Ministry of Home Affairs. They wanted to increase the punishment. Can I have some water? coat makes me stuffy. Now, they wanted to increase the punishment, and it was circulated to all the states. And Tamil Nadu, we recommended that it should be a capital punishment. No, we should have a capital punishment. Though, of course, there was a fear that the victim's life will be in danger. When the accused knows this is a thing, then the victim's life will be in danger. This is the only evidence available. She may be murdered. And it went to all the states, and many of the states did not agree that you should go for a capital punishment. Ultimately, it was dropped. What was 10 years punishment? Earlier, it was only 10 years punishment for rape. It became life imprisonment. Now it is life imprisonment. Now, of course, we're talking about higher punishment and also changes in Criminal Law Amendment Act to ensure speedy trial. So I will quote one particular instance where that is in the case of one particular sex doctor. You'll all know who it is. And we wanted in-camera trial. We wanted in-camera trial for him, and it was refused. We went to the High Court. High Court refused. And then we asked the women's organizations to appeal in Supreme Court. They appealed in Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said not only in-camera trial, please ensure that other video clippings, other things are also taken as evidence. So that really ensured that the evidence was properly appraised and we could get a proper conviction for the accused, for the person who had wronged many women. So it is possible where these are the problems which are there, and it is possible to overcome that provided there is a kind of a concerted action. Now, only last thing I would like to say regarding the statistics. We have all heard about statistics, how many cases of rape take place, how many cases of crime against women. In the case of rape, about 25,000 in the 2011 statistics. Very interesting thing, whether with this I will complete. I know Siddharth wants me to finish up fast, though he gave 5 minutes more for madam. Anyway, this is where women should have the say. See, now you take 2011 very interesting statistics. 21,000, see, totally about 24,206 cases occurred, cases of rape reported in 2011, okay? And out of this, in 21,939, almost works out to 80%, where the accused is known. In 244 cases, the parents and close family members are involved as accused. In the case of 1,497 cases, relatives are involved. And in the case of 7,619, neighbors are involved. Neighbors are involved in such rape cases. So known persons, other known persons, of course, 12,000. So the majority of the cases, the person is known. I do not know. We have to draw our own conclusions. What is it? That this is a very sorry state of affairs. And if you take Tamil Nadu, 2011, 675 cases, out of which parents and close family members 2, and relatives 96. Again, neighbors envy 249 cases. You had neighbors who were involved in these cases. These are all statistics. It has to make us think. Of course, I believe for every case that is reported, there are 10 cases which are not reported and equal number of cases which are not registered. So with this, I would like to, of course, you can ask questions, I will definitely answer. And this one small, this thing where, apart from the fast-track courts are getting close because policemen do not make use of them. They do not charge sheet the case quickly so that the fast-track courts have work. That is number one. And there is also a thing called scheduled trial, where the accused and the accused party and the prosecution, they sit together with the judge and ensure that unnecessary adjournments are not given. The cases are, it is ensured that there is a speedy trial on day-to-day basis, the witnesses are examined. These are all issues at the trial stage. But unless all these things are taken, a concerted action is taken, it is not possible. But as I said in the beginning, if there is a committed policeman, he wants to prevent heinous crimes, it is possible that he should do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, especially for your, for the candid way in which you assessed the role of the police, and for your statement that if the police or an SHO really wanted to stamp out crime, it is possible. And I think that you've brought a valuable perspective into today's discussion. Our next speaker is Mr. Shashi Kumar, please.
Well, I'll try and restrict my approach to the media part of it. We have had two very insightful perspectives on what has happened, something which has shocked the conscience of the nation, all of us. But what I think is, and this is, I'm actually treading very difficult waters here, because on the one hand, I think the media needs to keep its eye on the ball, and that it has done admirably in this case. If the media had not kept its eye on the ball, if it had not spoken about this bulletin after bulletin for the electronic media, day after day for the print media, the other new media and so on, I don't think the kind of critical mass, the tipping point that Siddharth spoke about would have happened. The media, I think, played a big role in enabling that. But you find a very strange situation where the media keeps its eye on the ball and also runs away with the ball. So you're not quite sure. Just when you're admiring the role of the media, you find that the media becomes part of the problem, rather than becoming an agent provocateur, which is a good thing in this particular case. Now, we have, I think it's through the media that you know the immensity of the problem. The immensity of the problem is, it's not an isolated case. It's not a case of this horrendous, this terrible incident that took place in Delhi. It's happening in this country almost on a regular basis, so much so that it's almost normative. I mean, it's something which as astounding as this should not be normative, but if you look at the statistics, if you look at the frequency, and if you look at the way in which those who have committed these ghastly crimes get away, if you look at the representatives we have in Parliament, against many of whom there are cases of sexual harassment, if you look at what's happening in terms of custodial rape by the police, if you look at what's happening in terms of what our army does in places like Kashmir or in the northeast and Manipur and so on. So this is something which is, seems to be part of the national psyche. And how can we get away from this problem unless you address it at that level? It is a social problem, it is a cultural problem. And the media, unfortunately, at times feeds into that problem. Even as I speak today, I was watching a serial on television yesterday, here on a channel, I won't name the channel, but it's a prime time serial, and it's called, and I won't mention that, it's called Tangam, yes. And there is this bigamic, this patriarchal bigamist who is missing and is assumed to be dead, and the whole serial is centered around a collector, an IAS officer, who is the heroine. And then there are the two wives who are being told by the villagers to start, going through the rituals of widowhood because the man hasn't come back home in time. And then the IAS officer puts up feeble resistance and says, but how do we know? They say, how can we violate the tradition? What will happen? If you don't do it, what will happen to our homes? What will people think of us? Will people marry from our homes? This is the logic, and this is happening in this day and age in a serial. You can imagine if the plot was a woman was raped in that house. I don't know what the solution for that in a plot would be. It would be as, I think, regressive as retrogressive. And I'm surprised that an IAS officer is seen, the IAS Officers Association should sue that serial. I mean, if these are the IAS officers you have, how are you going to get justice? So if this is the popular mentality as reflected in our popular, media, in a serial which is watched widely, you know that there is punitive rape by Katta Panchayats, by Khap Panchayats in the north, where a rape incident, if a rape occurs, the elders rule that the survivor, the rape survivor, should marry the person who raped her, mandatorily. Or, even worse, there are incidents where rape is used as punishment, as far back as Gajrauli. When it's Dalits, you go and you use rape as a lesson to teach people where they belong in the caste hierarchy, if they've overstepped their limits. And these are fed into the films. Films give us. In Tamil films, the Katta Panchayat is a glorified institution. The patriarch of the Katta Panchayat is seen as a benign patriarch of the village, whose word is law. Now, if these are the kind of archetypes and the stereotypes that you're perpetuating in the media, there's a huge problem. How will you get away from this? A problem which, as it exists, is so mammoth, is so difficult to handle. As I said, it's almost becoming a problem, a part of our psyche. And the media, I think, continues to feed into that. On television, you see, for instance, I think the television did a very good thing in highlighting the rape, the incident. And then when the issue of death penalty came up, I found anchors, I found the glitter in their eyes, you know, and they were very impatient with anyone who said no death penalty. They said, which means you're for rape, are you? I mean, it's a very simplistic, reductio ad absurdum ad nauseum. You know, this is what happens. And in that space of time, there's nobody can put up any cogent or, rational argument. You are typecast as pro-rape or anti-rape. And of course, the Hindu had a wonderful editorial, which I think provides some sanity to that if you did make the capital punishment applicable in cases of rape, I don't see why any rapist would leave any victim alive. Because he's done the ultimate. Whether he rapes and leaves the victim alive or whether he kills her, he's going to get the capital punishment. And the chances are that she may not identify him if she's dead. I mean, it even doesn't stand to reason that, you should apply capital punishment as an ultimate law in this case. So you find that none of this is really discussed, unfortunately, in the media, and that becomes a huge problem in dealing with this stereotype of race. In movies, in most Indian movies, you find that rape is the virtual presence. Whenever you see a woman and you see a not so savory man, you know what's happening next. That there's going to be a threat of rape, of kidnap, of rape, and the entire plot hangs in the balance after that. And this whole vulnerability of the woman becomes the whole peg of the film. This vulnerability of the woman. If she's vulnerable, she is subject to rape. If she's a strong woman, she has to be made vulnerable through rape. I mean, so there is no escape. It's a Hobson's choice, as far as the woman is concerned. So if it's a strong woman, one of the things which comes in her, she has to fight is the threat of rape. It's a threat of a violation of her sexual integrity, as it were. And you find this happening in film after film. And cinema in this country is the only mass media which has any pre-censorship. I mean, we don't have pre-censorship for the print or for television, and that's the way it should be. So you find that the worst examples are set by the only agency of the media which has pre-censorship. And I don't know, in that case, there's an argument against any pre-censorship, really speaking. Stigmatization. Now, who should be stigmatized, We are talking about social. Should the woman who has been... I'm not very... See, I was very happy, for instance, yesterday, when I saw on some prime channels, I saw survivors of rape, rape survivors, taking part in these discussions, boldly. I mean, they are not seeking anonymity anymore. They are arguing, they are saying what happened to them by example, and they are saying what they want seen so that this doesn't happen to others. Now, this anonymity and protectiveness I think is important. But I think the whole problem is the boot should be on the other foot. The person who should be socially stigmatized is the person who raped, not the person who was raped. But in our situation, it's almost as if we are making a case for protecting through a process. Otherwise you'll be stigmatized. So you need to protect the rape victim or the rape survivor. Rape victim is not a proper word, but a survivor. You want to protect her, but the other is not socially stigmatized. The other is legally punished. Even the process of the law, you have fast-track courts, they still take... We were glorifying the Rajasthan fast-track court until yesterday we heard that that's also come to us. There's a kind of hiccup there. It's not proceeding as fast as we would imagine. We seek certainty of punishment, but as Rajiv Dhawan once said, the whole problem here is the process is the punishment for the rape survivor. And finally, if there's punishment, there is punishment for the rapist. But already the process is the punishment. But perhaps... so I was very, it's heartening on the one hand to see emboldened people who are speaking out against this and the media is projecting them. I think those are good salutary examples. That this is not something to be ashamed of. Why should I be stigmatized if something happened to me against my, which I had nothing to do with? Why should I be isolated? Why should I be marginalized? Why should I be stigmatized? Why should I be protected? And why should the wool of secrecy be thrown over me? I think that again, at the root of it is a patriarchal look at what is the role of women in our society. I think, so a lot of these models need to be questioned. A lot of these models need to be questioned. Of course, there must be swift punishment. There must be quick and swift punishment, but unless I think the larger social and cultural attitudes to womanhood, to women, to children, I mean, imagine the role of children. And it's almost surreal that even as this incident of the rape is being discussed in the media, you're finding fresh incidents in state after state. Where children, where women continue to be harassed, continue to be sexually assaulted, continue to be raped, gang raped. So what are we as a society? This is something which needs a national emergency, I mean, just as you had a campaign for AIDS, just as we abolished, or sought to abolish, shall we say, diseases through huge campaigns, there should be a massive campaign. The government should put everything aside and be running a huge campaign to create an emergency consciousness about this situation. And until that is done, I think clinical discussions will, of course, have the advantage of trying to understand the problem as it is, but I think the media have a big role to play, society has a big role to play, the government has a big role to play, and I am not in a position to prescribe what needs to be done, but I can see that the issue must be seen in the mammoothness of what it is. Thank you very much.